attention is like a river where your attention goes, your energy flows. So imagine that our brain essentially has these grooves, and when we're grooving, our attention is in the flow. It is entered into a space where we're aware of how that energy is moving, and it's moving. It's not stagnant, so to speak. And it's nice, it feels good when there's a big river of flow moving through you. And when we feel this sort of trickle, or perhaps the common experience of attention moving in many different directions in modern society, that there's a lot of studies that have been done to show, one, that attention is obviously very important for productivity, that attention is somehow related to depression, and depression is not only the number one cause of workforce lack of productivity, but it's also just one of the number one most debilitating mental illnesses in the world. And we have the opportunity to retrain our attention and also just retrain our relationships to technology and in general, the world around us and the people around us, to be able to hold our attention longer. And there's a certain value to this just in the raw sort of element of focus as being something that you can scientifically increase over time, and that in, say, monks or meditators who have been practicing for many decades with thousands of hours of experience have significant changes in their brain from this practice that, in relation to attention, largely correlates to the ability to redirect energy back to a certain region of the brain, usually the prefrontal cortex, which is this center of reason and will in the mind, and it's our focus driver. It's where we have planning and judgments and the ability to generally make decisions. And so being able to redirect our attention back here is a valuable skill for a lot of reasons. And we can see how this may first just seem like something that is immediately very practical in our lives, and also see how this is why people have created entire wisdom traditions around the ability to focus. And this is very, in many ways, more common in the East than it is in the West. There are a lot of contemplative practices in the West, for sure, and there is a large body of information that the West has provided, and at the same time, there's a lot of information and wisdom, so to speak, on the more contemplative practices of stillness and whatnot from the East, because that's been the primary expression of understanding, understanding, if you appreciate that word, but the ability to know the self. And in the West, there's a sort of different approach that's more external, that, perhaps we go more towards the route of psychotherapy or journaling or something like that to become more reflective and contemplative. And the bottom line being that there are things we can do to open up these channels of focus that are already there, so to speak. That it's more like opening a door than it is like, sometimes there's increasing the flow of energy, and other times it's just directing the energy through where it needs to go, if that makes sense. And so as we tune into what this feels like, there's a deep sense of embodiment. Like many people who have attention challenges in school, that they're often fidgety, and this is a sign of a lot of different things. But fidgeting is just like a thing that happens in many of us, and it's something that can be trained to be a valuable tool. There's a lot of evidence to show that those little fidget spinners and little things that you can just play with actually benefit your ability to focus, and say doodling in class can be something that, well, your teacher might not like it, can actually help with focusing, and it's something that keeps the mind engaged despite, still take notes. That's the bottom line. And it's the experience of being able to focus on the breath as a primary action that is constantly happening within us. And not only is it something that's happening within us, it's one of the few things where we have control over it, even though it happens automatically if we're not controlling it. And this means we can change the way it happens automatically when we're not thinking about it, at the same time generally becoming more aware of it over time, to the point where perhaps even we are so attentive that we are aware of every single breath that we take. And this is something that is talked about in more traditions of mindfulness or something like that, of the like the Buddhist traditions. And there's a deep focus on that in other traditions like Zen, where there's a primary practice is sitting still and staring at a wall, and that can be very valuable. In fact, this is what Da Vinci did, that he would sit and stare at a wall until he saw his paintings, or until he saw his visions of the anatomy of the human body or something like that. So there's a value of having a blank wall to stare at. And so we have this understanding that perhaps there's something to simplicity, the simplicity of breath, the simplicity of a simple space that helps us focus, that our nervous system, our behavior is mediated in some way by our environment. And our ability to change our environment is an act of our conscious willpower, that we can then use our environment as a tool for navigating inner states of focus and flow. And everybody, of course, can do this. And there are many different ways, people wearing blinders while they study in a cubicle, that sort of thing. That I knew a doctor who, he was a pediatric neurologist, and he said the best way that he focused was sitting in the middle of the library where everybody was walking around. But the reason why he did that was because he wanted to feel like he wasn't missing out on something. He wanted to feel like he was still part of the social engagements of people just milling about in the library, rather than being in the silent cube. And maybe this can be extrapolated to generally the people who may have the sense that there are people who live in caves that don't do anything else other than meditate, and that what about everybody else living in the world? Is it realistic to be able to pick up a practice of meditation or any other contemplative practice that was done perhaps centuries or millennia ago, but now how does it fit into our daily life? And it's a valid question, because in many ways, like anything else, we have to make time for it and know what we're making time for, know that there's a valid reason for why we're making time for it, and that we have a lot to gain when we use a scientific method, so to speak, and knowing that at the same time that we can be scientific, that there are ancient heritages and traditions that have perfected this in deeper philosophical systems. Perhaps just for the moment, there's the Indian philosophy of yoga and meditation, that yoga originated mostly as a breathing and meditation practice, and then the physical postures evolved from there as a way to release the excess energy in the body, so that we could strengthen our spines and breathe better and be able to sit and focus in meditation. And there's a deep meaning in the yoga philosophy beyond just purely being able to focus, that there's a merging that happens when we sit in stillness, emerging into bliss, essentially. That is the goal in many ways, that we are stilling the mind and the body by directing energy into the spine, away from the fidgety motions of the nervous system, the peripheral nervous system, where a lot of energy gets stored. We release that energy back into the spine. Perhaps you can do it through exercise or through yoga postures, and then through breathing, and then stilling the body completely until there's no motion. This is very important, to keep the body totally still, even as best as you can, for as long as you can focus on doing that. And that a meditation practice can help with that. When there's a lot of different things to focus on internally, we can release our attention externally. And at the same time, to not be judgmental about the process of, if you do decide to pick up some kind of practice like this, that you know you're probably going to be fidgeting, like it's okay. And that when you do let go of that sort of process, it's like a mental process, then we can still the motion of the mind when we still the motion of the body. When we even the breath, we still the waters, so to speak, of the mind and the heart. And the breath is this vehicle for awareness or consciousness that allows us to change our state fairly rapidly. And there's a lot of studies about breath work at this point. So the simplest point being that is both from the ancient yoga texts as well as from the modern science journals, that keeping the breath even is very valuable, that there are different methods that people describe that do different things. In simple terms, keeping the breath even, both for the inhale and the exhale, that you can modulate the amount of hold either after the inhale or after the exhale, and that's up for discussion. But in simple terms, even just keeping all of those even, practicing something like either just even count inhale and then exhale, or even count inhale, hold, and then exhale like an equilateral triangle, or inhale, hold, exhale, hold. And that's called box breathing. Any of these methods in the ancient yoga text would be called samavriti. Samavriti just means same time, essentially, in this context, that they're breaths that take the same amount of time for each duration of the breath. And so we have this experience of being able to use something simple like our breath to expand our field of awareness, so that essentially the heart expands. And when the heart expands, the fidgetiness goes away and the energy starts flowing to the brain. So rather than energy being in the physical body, in the arms and the legs and the hands and the feet, that energy moves and it goes into the spine, it goes into the heart. And when it goes in the spine and the heart, when we're still, when that energy moves away from the external because we are still, and that energy moves into the spine and into the heart, our heart rhythms become coherent, and that's when the energy really starts moving into the brain, or that the brain and the heart are communicating on a much deeper level. And then focus happens from there. It's something you could say that happens in some ways of its own accord, or it's like you have to turn the key to the ignition and then it goes. But it still maintains the required effort. It's just like the effort on the gas pedal rather than trying to push a car down the road or something like that. We have a certain degree of acceleration required to move into that mental gear, so to speak, and then from there we can set it on cruise control, or steer and change speed as we need for the task that we're doing. But it's the ability to tune into that level of self-control, essentially, that doesn't require doing a whole lot. A lot of the time we have mental barriers to doing things because they are hard or seem like they're a lot of effort or whatever, just not enjoyable. And this is something that is actually enjoyable. It's something that we can do wherever we are, and You don't really look like you're doing anything if you're just practicing some breathing exercises. And the important thing with breathing exercises too is to not force the breath, to stay relaxed as you're breathing, to do your best to use your diaphragm and your lower belly when you're breathing, not just the chest, and to breathe through the nose more than the mouth as best as you can, but do your best to just enjoy breathing overall and don't think too much about it. Just, you can use numbers to count your breath, but that's a valuable practice. You can also just breathe naturally and just listen to the breathing. If you do rounds of breathing, use rounds of 12. That's a simple way to do it. You can do rounds of 8 or 6 too. This is not so much a hard rule. It's just a way to count that is a common number of repetitions. And so we can change the duration of our breath to be shorter or longer, so to speak, that our breath can be longer. And that means that we are taking in more oxygen usually, but also you can change the duration of the breath without changing the volume of the breath. So you could have a very slow but sort of shallow inhale and then start to inhale deeper and deeper and deeper and deeper, but still maintaining that overall flow, not very great over any 1 second period, if that makes sense. Or you could take very big, short breaths. And there are different functions that this serve. Usually the longer breaths are more relaxing and the shorter breaths are more energizing. So if you want to do an energizing breath, this would be something like breath of fire, which is essentially breathing out through the nostrils, usually the nostrils or the mouth, depending on how your mouth and nose are, and then enjoying the process of stilling the mind after heating up the body by going like this. If you do that 20 or 30 times, maybe 50 or so, your first time around, depending on how you're feeling, this can be a really simple way to just bring a lot of energy into the body if you are feeling slow or sluggish. And then the longer deeper breaths, these are for stilling the nervous system. So the animals that breathe the slowest live the longest. They have the lowest heart rates and are generally some of the cooler, more relaxed animals out there, but it's mostly the turtles and the parrots, and the whales. Deep, slow breathing. And that's about it for right now. Until next time, thank you so much for watching. Have a beautiful day.